Bambos, Charles Demetriou. We are here.
Andy was the whole day walking in the sun.
No, I was not. A half an hour. I got like a half an hour in. I was very busy.
This was me.
Yes.
Cold emailing for how many
Yeah,
hours?
Bambos is just scrangling. In fact, I think we should just make it easier. We're going to put a hat in front of the house and say, "Here, donate here."
Struggling artist.
Struggling artist.
No, don't do that.
No.
So today we have Jack Ori.
Yes, we have Jack Ori on, and the show is Becoming a Man. It's gender roles, of course, as well. But we're going to be discussing with Jack Ori Becoming a Man. And I wrote this out because I always screw these things up. Being raised and socialized female and transitioning to become a man.
And I love what Andy said before the show. I saw your little finger. He said that on the show, we endeavor to talk about everything that is not talked about. And we're going to do that on
Wonderful.
Chaos.
Us.
So today I was feeling sorry for myself. So I put this beautiful classical music piece and I put the camera filming me as I was cold emailing.
Oh.
And you can see the sun coming out through the window. And I was like, this is what you need to do when you love what you're doing. Grind.
You know what I love about whatever state of mind you're in is that you're embracing it and you're not struggling through it. And I find that just delicious.
I am really having fun because for those of you who don't know, I've been meditating 100 minutes a day for the last 3 weeks now. It's my third week. And writing gratitudes every day. Like I said, for the next 30 days, we're going to experience, see how my mindset changes when I do this practice every day. No compromise. And I see that my bank account hasn't changed, but I have changed.
Yeah.
And what came up for me, why this was important is I no longer feel a struggle. In fact, I'm tapping into creativity, which wasn't there before with the stress, which gives me the possibility to strive instead of thrive, thrive instead of survive.
Yeah.
So that was, and even today, a friend messaged me. He's like, "Hey, my partner's birthday, and we're collecting money." And I saw my passive wanting to ignore that message.
Yeah.
I was like, "Hey, listen, this is where I'm at right now. I'm not going to dance around it, but I'd love to have dinner with you guys at some point." And it was really beautiful because it made us closer as opposed to just ignoring it.
Yeah, I love that.
So that was me. I've unloaded. I'm fully present. Meanwhile, Andy was making pictures of the Vondo Park where everyone's partying.
It's pretty dangerous out there now. I think that the police are going to get active in about an hour from now, and it's going to be on the international news. So we're going to see rioting at some point in the park.
Yeah.
So this is a show that I'm two sides on. I'm really excited, and I know I'm going to offend people. And I know I'm going to offend people because there are ways in which people tend to negotiate discussions around gender. And I don't know the rules. And I haven't been doing a lot of research on those rules. Yeah. And what I loved with Jack is basically said, "Hey, I'll let you know when you're off base," right?
Yeah.
But in a loving way.
So Andy's apologizing up front.
Yes, but that won't help because anyone that's offended is going to write me a message anyways. Yeah. And it was really nice because it even started in the introduction because I wanted to create the context for the show. And then, of course, in asking Jack, I said, "Well, Jack, let's frame it. Like, what would, for instance, be like the name you were born with?" And then discuss like the obvious sort of A to B transition. And then the first thing Jack says, in general, transgenders don't want to necessarily bring up that past name, right? And then he was lovingly said, "Hey, I'm happy to do it." But I'm like, we don't have to do it then. I mean, there's no need. But those are the kind of things that are nice because you only learn that through the interaction. And I think that's the beauty of the show and what I want in my life is I don't have to live everyone else's issue, but when I'm with them, I can enjoy the deeper understanding of how it is to live in another person's shoes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're going to love this show because even the 3-4 minutes that we had with Jack before we started, you can tell that he's very heart connected and like there was no tension even when Andy was messing up.
Yeah, it was never that bad.
No. But
I'm like nicely offensive.
and without further ado, shall we?
Yeah,
bring
I
him
say
on?
we bring Jack on.
Welcome with a great beard,
Jack.
Hey, Andy, how are you?
Good. This is Bambos, by the way. He's the better looking of the two.
Hey, nice to meet you.
and better teeth.
Yeah, I had an agreement with my wife. Is I got on the scale this year and I was 97 kilos, which is a lot. And then I said I will shave my beard when I drop under 90. So that's the so now I'm at 94. So there's 4 more kilos. So I'm probably going to end up looking like you before I get to shave my beard up. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for having me.
And I think it's also important to note that we're discussing the transgender thing, but in actuality, your life is also very much not about that. You're an author who writes books that have nothing to do with transgender.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, that's definitely like part of my life is being a parenting coach for parents of transgender kids, and the other part of my life is the rest of my life. But
yeah,
but I really think it's the way it is for everybody. Like, I think when someone transitions, they change their whole life. They don't just change their gender. So
yeah, yeah. And it's interesting because I also mentioned that my niece, who I'm also close to, has gone through this transition. Not only transition, she was born Catholic, and then she transitioned to become Jewish. And at the same time, she's transitioning gender to be gender identified as male. And what I found fascinating is that you said that your job is there to coach the parents of these children. And I'd laugh and say, I could imagine there are a lot of times my brother and his wife could have used coaching to address their challenges because theirs were as great as their daughter, who now is their son,
Yeah, definitely. That's one of the reasons I do it is because there's a real need for that. I used to work for the Trevor Project, which is a crisis line for LGBT youth mostly, but we got a lot of parents who called too. And sometimes parents would call and they would be like, my child just told me they're really a girl, or they just told me they're really a boy. And what do I do? And one of the things I learned from that and from my own transition is that parents go through their own process, because by the time you come out, you've already done all the soul searching and all this, it's really me and all of that, and decide this is what I have to do. But then you go and you tell your parents and it's all new for them. And they're like, what?
Yeah.
And they're right at the beginning.
And it's sort of like all the phases of death. It's like denial, anger,
right.
Like they have to go through all of that process.
Right. Yeah, that whole grief process. Plus, I think a lot of times parents have this feeling like, not guilt exactly, but like, how did I not know? Like, how did my child have this big secret and I had no idea, kind of thing?
Yeah.
Makes me feel a bit emotional when I tune into a child need to tell their parents, like that level of vulnerability and maybe not received in that moment.
Yeah.
And then what is the time frame between I got the information, now I'm going to make a phone call, and if they make the phone call, right?
Yeah.
Because I can imagine, you need to talk to someone.
Right. And it becomes it's a difficult thing, and I think a lot of parents too, sometimes they'll feel like they'll go through this stage of, is this really my child? Maybe it's just a phase. Maybe they just got this idea somewhere. And when they're in that stage, they're not really all that open to it. But that's the time where I think parents do call like crisis lines, because they're like, well, these people will understand if no one else will. And I think, it's also a kind of thing where I think there's not as much information readily available as there might be. Yeah. Especially I'm in America, where we're debating a lot about, should trans kids be allowed to go to school if their gender, and what bathroom should they be in, and all that stuff. That seems to be very important in America. And so so for a lot of parents, it's all new to them. They're like, where do I go? Who do I talk to? And that's why I want to fill that need, because as someone who's transgender, who didn't come out until I was an adult, it's that perspective that a lot of people are missing, because you can go to a therapist who maybe has been trained in learning what these issues are, but it's not the same as talking to somebody who's experienced it.
Yeah, and I guess there is and you know, the hardest thing is as the parent, on one level, you have to say, oh, it is a phase, because you don't know at the start, because even if you take it totally seriously and say, okay, we're going to get a gender assignment, you know, I mean, then in a weird way, you're not letting it unfold.
Right, because you're right. Because it does mean different things for different people. Like for me, I chose to go on cross-gender hormones, and that was that. And then I was happy. Some people don't. You could go to some people will be like, no, I don't want the surgeries, and you know, a lot of trans men get top surgery and have their female chest removed. You know, and that wasn't something that I personally felt I needed to do. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you get people who are like, I'm dressing as a male and or as a female, and that's good enough for me. Or you might get someone who does, or you might even get, there are some trans men who are like, I identify as male, but I don't think that it should be attached to any sort of clothing, so I'm still going to wear my makeup and my dresses and the things that we traditionally consider feminine, but just know I'm a guy. You know, so you get all of that kind of stuff. You really have to talk. It's really a process of talking with your kid about what do they mean by this, and what do they want now, and what's the best way to handle this, and what's the first step. And that can be overwhelming too, because I think a parent here is transgender and they're thinking irreversible stuff, hormones and surgery, and it doesn't have to be that way.
I think that the biggest, by the way, we didn't discuss about cursing before we got on. We will curse at occasion if it's okay with a guest, and we usually ask before we go on air. So I'm going to.
Okay. Yeah.
You want to curse?
Well, I could see words. I saw words forming, and I wanted to stop them before. But so I want to say the real mind fuck is that it's, and this is going to get kind of meta, so I apologize. But the mind needs to categorize to create comfort. And so these gender roles, which have been so implicitly in our socialized lives, are so hard to not see. So in a way, what we're asking the brain to do is let go of all the biases, all the prejudices that you you didn't even know you had until we said, hey, this isn't a man, this is a female. So, and all of a sudden you're confronted with the things you didn't even know that you had as beliefs in your system.
Right. Exactly. I think I think you really hit the nail on the head with that, because it's so ingrained in us that we don't even really think about how gendered things are. You know, anytime that you fill out a form for anything, it'll ask, what's your gender? And now I'm starting to notice, like, and I know medical forms you kind of need to know sometimes, because the doctor needs to know, like, what the appropriate treatments are and things are. But like, I was happy today filling out that form to find out where I can get my COVID vaccine that asks what's your gender, male, female, or non-binary, or prefer not to say, which I thought was really cool here in New York, because a lot of places still don't have that.
And so you're, when they say, what is your gender, then you will say male.
Yes, I will say male.
And then what would be the question that you would say? Would you ever say female on a form for anything right now?
Well,
if you were asked.
Well, if it asks like biological sex, sometimes it gets a little bit confusing, because
but if
it's gender, I'll say male. If with medical things, I try to find a way to let them know, just in case, because there's might be something they need to know about it.
Exactly.
And there was this time where I was trying to get student loans, and I had to put female on the form, because when I put male, it was like, you haven't registered for the selective service, so we can't give you student loans. And I was like, oh, well, I don't want to go through all that red tape and explain all that. I'll just put female on the form.
Yeah, practical reasons, just practical reasons. Got it.
Jack,
you had a question, I heard.
I have a Bambos question.
Yeah.
Can you kind of, like, I want to be a 5-year-old on this show, because I am completely ignorant. And in a way, I'm really, I know my curiosity is being drawn to the moment in your life when you started to feel that something was different in you, and on what was the journey that you took, and how did you articulate it, at least to yourself?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there were actually two parallel journeys because there was when I was a kid, and then there was when I was an adult and actually did something about it. Because as a kid, I didn't really, I was I was born in 78, so during the 80s and 90s, there weren't like all this awareness of transgender issues that we have now. Like on my Facebook group now, I have some people who have kids who are 3, 4, 5 years old who are transgender. And that was not a thing when I was growing up. So I didn't really have the language. So as a kid, I felt more like a boy than a girl. And I would do things like, obviously I have the big beard now, but I remember thinking when I was 8, 9 years old, when I grow up, I want my beard to look like, oh yeah, I'm not going to have one, I'm a girl kind of thing. Where I would think like that. And then there was also the whole thing of, I was treated as a girl. I was I was sent to the girls' bathroom, talked about as a girl. I was, I had a sister and a brother, and I would be called their sister, all those gendered things. So I just kind of assumed, like, well, I'm the kid, they're the adult, and they're saying I'm a girl, so that must be right.
And this is how old are we now when you're saying this?
Like maybe 5, 6.
Okay.
So that was when I was really young, and then growing up, it wasn't something I really thought about. It just sort of becomes ingrained, like you said. But then as I got older, I did do things like when I went away to college, I would use like male personas on online forums. Like I would put a male name and say I was male, and then feel like, oh my God, that I'm saying something that I'm not, because what if they find out, kind of thing. But I didn't really connect it until in my 30s. I made a friend who at the time was the first person I knew who ever came out as transgender. So by knowing her and seeing her journey, it started making me think, like what is going on with my journey. And there were things I identified with, and I always felt like sometimes when people will be like ma'am or say girl or woman, it didn't feel like it connected with me. And then, so at that time I was like, okay, I started saying I was gender neutral was the word I used, where I was like, I'm not, and there are people, who are non-binary, gender neutral, gender queer, all those kinds of words, who feel like they're not strictly male or female or identify in all sorts of ways. But for me, it was just like a way of trying to figure it out, because I was like, well, I'm male and I'm female kind of thing. And then I would dress male, have a male haircut, and go to a restaurant, and they would be like, how you doing, ma'am? And that would annoy me. And I would be like, what is wrong with them? And at that point is when I was like, okay, I have to go beyond just dressing this way, because this is driving me crazy.
Yeah. So you skipped a lot of years. You went from 5 to 30. And I'm thinking to myself, like from 5, that's 25 years in there. So during those 25 years, obviously you're not identifying yourself as as female, but the world is identifying you as female. Do you when you're going out, are you dating? Are you like so how does that unfold? How does that look?
Right. So that was a kind of thing that was really very awkward in a lot of ways. For one thing, I went through puberty very early. So by the time I was 10 or 11, I was completely developed as a female. So that was like kind of like I didn't know what to do with that. And then as a teenager, I didn't really date. But then, because I also have autism, so that was also like very mixed in with it. College, I dated people who were not really the appropriate people to date. I ended up in my longest relationship was with somebody who was addicted to drugs, and I met them because I was doing a master's program in creative writing, and one of my teachers had a stepdaughter who had just gotten out of rehab, and her mom was like, oh, why don't you go live with her? That would be great for both of you, because it was really more of a, why don't you fix my daughter kind of thing, without saying it. And her daughter had a friend from her drug days who I became friends with, and the daughter was jealous of us, and there was a lot of craziness and chaos that went on, and I ended up living with him, and that ended up being a very unhealthy type of relationship where I wasn't using drugs other than smoking pot, which I did with him, but the hard stuff I know.
Yeah.
But he was an alcoholic and an addict, and so
Yeah.
my life was very chaotic.
Yeah,
And
horrible.
so, yeah, and unfortunately, he ended up overdosing soon after I left. So
Yeah.
that was my
But I mean,
longest relationship.
but you weren't dating females. You were dating
Right.
males.
Right. I was dating males at that point, and then at a point after I moved to North Carolina, I had gone to California for school from New York. Then I moved to North Carolina because I wanted to get my teacher's license, and that was when my friend passed away, like right after I moved there. And then at some point during that, I started exploring my sexual identity, and I came out as asexual, which means like I identify more as demisexual. I don't feel sexual attraction unless I first feel that emotional connection. So, and at that time, I was just like, I would love to try a relationship with a woman and see how that works out. And then I started transitioning. Somewhere along there, I started exploring my gender identity, and I went to a therapist because I thought I was supposed to, because
that's what you do.
Yeah, and then she said, all you should do is go to Planned Parenthood, and they will give you, in North Carolina, Planned Parenthood takes care of transition, which is interesting. So I did go to Planned Parenthood, and they asked me a lot of questions about, like, how long have you felt this way? Like, pretty much all the same stuff that we've been discussing.
Yeah.
And they started me on hormones. Then I moved to New York to be closer to my family after my sister had her kids.
Can we slow down that process a little bit? So when you start taking hormones, you're in your 30s,
right?
Like what do you experience, and at what pace? So like what is it that you start to see different in yourself, and how does that like happen over time?
Right. Yeah. So the hormones worked really well for me. Like, it varies from person to person. I know a lot of people, it takes a long time for them to see any changes, but I started like seeing facial hair immediately, seeing hair on my body immediately, that kind of stuff, and it made me feel more right, like more like who I'm supposed to be. So I saw right away like less depression and feeling better about life, and my family noticed that too because I come out to them during this time. And I remember my mom being on the phone with my uncle, and she was still using my female name, but she was like, yeah, she seems more happy now. And I was just like, that's funny, disconnect, because I was like, I was looking kind of like
but that goes back to what we were saying earlier, is that the individual, it's so difficult to switch the brain's autopilot, right? Like, because even my niece, who's the niece, she's not a niece anymore. She's a nephew.
Right.
But mentally, it's like a jungle gym in my brain trying to say, oh, I have to switch it. It's a very active process. It's like it's not that you can passively talk. You really have to think a lot.
Jack,
right.
Before you continue.
Yeah.
Were there moments with your parents, if I can ask, where you experienced not being able to feel their love, or maybe they had a hard time communicating love?
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't so much that I didn't feel their love, but I felt like I knew my parents loved me, but I felt like they didn't know who I was, kind of thing. Like, I felt like they loved this fake person who wasn't really me. So that was kind of confusing.
Yeah.
And it was kind of hard to come out, even though my parents are the kind of people who I knew in the abstract were accepting. They believed in gay and transgender rights and that kind of thing. But it's also, no matter how accepting your family is, there's always a thought in your back of your head. They might feel that in the abstract, but it could be different when it's your own child.
Yeah.
So it was a hard thing to do. And especially because at first, when I wasn't really clear on it, and I switched to using my Hebrew name, which was also a feminine name, but I was like, people won't know because it's a different language kind of thing. But people still identified that name as female, which was frustrating. And then eventually I chose a male name. But during that time was when I came out, when I was like, call me Shula, which was my Hebrew name. And I think that was when my family was kind of like confused. And we did have this long talk where my parents were like, are you sure this is real? Are you sure this isn't just because you have a friend who's transgender, you know?
Yeah.
kind of thing. And
by
then,
the way, that's a great book title for the next book. Call Me Shula. Like that sounds just to make sure. I just wanted to mark that for the future.
I have thought at some point I should write a memoir.
Oh yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
Like from the moment we've met you though, you've just been this bubbly energy, and then you threw in the word depression, and I feel that now that I'm getting to know you better, that because you feel more comfortable with who you are,
Right.
So how would you compare the Jack that I'm meeting now as opposed to 10 years ago?
Yeah, tell us the shitty years.
Yeah, so well, like I said, I did like have a friend who the whole drug addiction thing was pretty messed up, and that's probably where most of my regrets come from, because even though I didn't do drugs, it was sort of like this vicarious drug disaster, because it was like we wouldn't have money for me. I was getting my MFA, and you at the University of Southern California, you have to pay for their parking lot, and I didn't have $4 to pay in the parking lot because all our money was going to his drug habits. So, I would be late to my classes because I couldn't find parking, kind of thing. And so that program kind of like ended up being a big waste of money and time, because and there was a lot of anxiety where it'd be like, I would never know, like, coming home, would he be sober, would he be drunk, would he be high, and all that chaos. So that was probably the toughest time in my life. And then, like I said, and that was my 20s, and what had happened was when I was 28, I was like, I'm going to be 30 in a couple of years, and I'd like to say I'm doing something of my life, because at the time I was working in retail, and that's not to put down anyone who is working in retail, but considering that I had a master's degree in creative writing and a bachelor's in psychology, I felt like I could be doing something more than a minimum wage job of my life. And so that was at that point I wanted to go back to school, and I decided I wanted to be a special ed teacher, because I wanted to work with kids with autism primarily. And so that was like a tense thing in our household, because I was changing and he was afraid he was losing me, which he kind of was. And when you get drugs and alcohol mixed in with that, then it becomes very tense and volatile. And so what eventually ended up happening was I ended up moving to North Carolina to go back to school. And he had a DUI, so he had to stay in LA because he had to finish his requirements, and then he used drugs, and that was that. So that was a really difficult time, because there was so much grief and so much regrets, and then also so much, because he's not here anymore. Now I'm seeing how bad things were, which you can't see from in the middle of that. So, and then trying to teach. Well, first of all, North Carolina, like where I taught, was in this very small rural community where they literally had not heard of anyone who wasn't Christian. So that was a whole other issue. And on top of which, it was like, even though I hadn't started transitioning yet, I had a little bit of facial hair because I had a hormone imbalance. So hormone imbalance, if you look at female hormones, and the principal will be like, oh, you need to shave that because women aren't supposed to look like that. The kids might make fun of you. And this
was before you were taking hormones.
Yeah, this was before I was taking hormones, and
so you actually your hormones were already like generated from a male hormone. So in a way, you added to the hormones that were already kicking in your system.
Right. Yeah, because I had like a tiny little bit of facial hair that, like, that a lot of women or female-born people have, like a tiny little bit of hair on the chin or on the lip, and a lot of women will shave that or wax that because they don't want that. And so I wasn't doing that, and that would get me in trouble with the principal, who would be like, that doesn't look professional, you have to get rid of that, And I remember there was one time because I taught special ed, and the teacher next door to mine taught the behaviorally challenged kids, which is a nice way of saying kids who don't behave. And I remember I was watching her class once when she couldn't be in the room, and one of the girls tried to like make me feel bad by being like, "You're a man," and I was like very confused about why that didn't upset me.
Did you say thank you?
Yeah.
And I knew like it wasn't, and it was like I said, a very Christian community too. So it was the kind of thing where it was like I didn't fit in, and so I was like, okay, this teaching thing is not working for a lot of reasons. That was one of them. Also, because I was teaching severely autistic kids, and the principal had this idea that, oh well, they can't learn. You should just babysit, and I wanted to actually teach, so that didn't end up working out. And so then it was like, again, all that soul searching and like, what am I going to do with my life? And it got to the point where it was like, I was doing some freelance ghostwriting for like websites and stuff and making like $300 every couple of weeks. Not making, so it was at the point where it's like I have to make arrangements with my landlord to pay the rent late because I'm not going to have it till the middle of the month, and I have to make arrangements with this one and that one and that one, and during that time too was when I was beginning to transition. And one of the things that I want to say is like with the government social programs that we have here, like food stamps and stuff, that makes it difficult because it's like obviously they're going to ask what's your legal name, what's all those things, and number one, if you're self-employed, they're usually going to be like, go get a job. Number two, if you are like I was at that time, I had not legally changed my name yet, so I had a female name, but I looked like this. That was awkward, and I never wanted to even I never even filled out the food stamp application because I was like, I don't want to put this name on this application.
Right.
And what ultimately got me to change my name was I got a jury duty notice. And it was under my legal name. And I was like, I cannot go there looking like this and having a female name. Someone's going to think that I stole someone's ID, And changing your name in North Carolina was very difficult because it cost about $600, which obviously was less more than I was making at the time. And they go make you jump through all these hoops because they want to make sure that you're not changing your name to evade child support is their official excuse.
Jack, did you ever experience bullying?
I throughout my whole life, it was something that's very difficult and something that I actually write about in all my books. All my protagonists deal with bullying because of it. As a child, like I mentioned, having autism, I read on like a college level in like first grade. So that makes it difficult in and of itself to relate to other kids, and especially the kids who are having trouble reading. Sometimes there was a boy who was not a good reader, not a strong reader, and he was always bullying me. He was also a patient of my dad's, so it was like that Eddie Haskell thing where he would be nice if my dad was around.
Oh yeah.
And be awful otherwise. And I think he picked on me because I was reading so far ahead and he was struggling. So that made him not like me.
It didn't have to do then with you and your journey. It had to do with just you being really smart.
Yeah, that did, definitely. But there was also around fourth grade, is when kids start to separate into girls and boys. And it was like in the early grades, like kindergarten, first, second grade, I played with the boys and it wasn't a big deal. We'd run races at lunch or whatever. By third, fourth grade, boys tend to be like, ew, you're a girl, go away.
Oh yeah.
And so a lot of times I didn't feel like a relationship with the girls either. A lot of times the girls would be like, you're sitting like a boy or something like that. So it was kind of like, where do you go? And I had one friend who was a boy.
Can we slow it down?
Yeah.
Where do you go?
Yeah. So I think that's what really made me a reader, because it was like, while everyone else is playing at lunch, I will just read my book because I don't really feel like I fit any place. So
like this, like you kind of hide here.
Yeah.
You couldn't see it. Bambos always likes plugging my book. Thankfully for me.
But so I did a lot of reading, and I did make one friend who was a boy who
Jack, can I slow you down a little bit?
Yeah.
We're really traveling like, and
light
like
speed.
I'm almost in tears listening to your story, and it feels like you don't have to be in tears, but more, it feels like you're at peace with it. But are you also reliving it a little bit, or are you like, it's in the past, I'm really happy with where I am? Because I'm really,
yeah, for the most part, I'm at peace with it. Sometimes when I'm writing my fiction, I feel that connection to it again because my characters will deal with bullies or they will deal with feelings of they don't belong anyplace. And sometimes that'll make me tear up when I'm writing. So, but it is interesting because it's like, I think also I'm like, wow, I really have a lot of life to share.
Well, you've got a memoir. I mean, as you were talking, I saw the movie in my head. You know, I was like, wow, I see a lot of activity here. That like
he's very visual, like that.
Very visual.
So if you can see it, you need to do it.
Go ahead.
So Jack, I want to jump into something else. Where, like, I'm trying to feel what it's like to be you, and I'm walking on the street and I see a man or a woman that I feel attracted to. How do you go about to engage it, if you would engage it? And do you ever find yourself like procrastinating because you would have to explain too much, or how does that process work for you?
Right. Yeah, that is really difficult. And honestly, all my relationships have all been online. Like I met the person online. And I think that both being transgender and having the autism has made that easier. Because for me also, like I shared earlier, I don't feel that physical attraction at first. So I will feel that emotion, but I will feel like that emotional connection. Like I'll meet someone, I'll be like, I really want to get to know this person. But then it can be like in my head, I'm like, do I want to know them as a friend? Do I want to know them as more as a friend? So that can be a little confusing.
Yeah. What did you call that?
Demisexual.
Demisexual.
DEMI?
Yes. Yeah, and what that means is somebody who doesn't feel the physical attraction until they have an emotional connection.
And it's gender neutral, meaning it could be male or female in that world.
Yeah, for me it can. For some people, they romantically only want to be with a certain gender.
Okay.
But for me, it's whatever. I tend to be more interested in establishing a relationship with a female. Yeah. But I've also dated men, so it's it could be whatever, and or also non-binary people who are neither, like, who don't identify as either male or female. So
when you'll date these people, will you often find that they've already had more experience in this realm where there's less gender identity, or will sometimes you be the first time that they'll have that experience?
Sometimes it'll be that I'm the first time. I dated, the first woman I dated was a woman who had never dated a trans person before. And she didn't have a problem with it, though it did get a little awkward because I didn't know if she knew. I assumed she did because we met on Facebook, where on my Facebook profile it's very like trans clear.
Yeah.
So I kind of assumed she knew that. And then
what do you mean by trans clear?
Like if you look at my profile, I'm very open about the fact that I'm trans. So I kind of assumed she knew since we had met on Facebook, and then we were doing we were doing the texting back and forth, and it got a little bit intimate, and it got a little bit to like, let's talk about a sexual fantasy. And when we did that, I kind of hesitated on it when she was talking about what she wanted to do to me. I was like, does she know what I have down there?
That's like, we need to have a discussion. Transgender is different than transsexual.
Right? So I asked her and I texted her and I was like, I just did it like very, like, I just tried to be very natural about it. Like when I was texting with her, I was like, just talked about what she could do to what I had, and just, and she was like, oh, I don't care, but I had no idea. So that was kind of awkward. It was the kind of thing where it's like, that's one of the things I think with dating when you're transgender is like it always goes through your head. Do they know? When do I tell them? Like,
and it seems a bit weird because it's not like the first thing you want to talk about in a
right,
date. You
right.
know?
You
Just for the record, before we go, I don't have a penis. You know,
Right.
like that's not the first conversation you want to have. Like,
Right.
I don't even know if I like you yet.
Right. And like you don't even know like what the person knows or doesn't know or about transgender or what they think. And
Project.
you know,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah, totally.
And unfortunately also for sometimes you need to be able to have a certain level of trust with the person because you need to know they're not going to become violent or anything like that.
Has that ever happened?
That has not happened to me, fortunately.
Yeah.
You hear a lot of stories that it does happen to people.
Because the other person feels betrayed or misled, and then they feel shame and guilt, and then they take it out, or what would be the reasoning behind
I
that?
think there are a lot I think it has to do with homophobia too, where people are like, I thought I was in a straight relationship, and now you're telling me that I did something gay because we have the same genitals or whatever. I think that has a lot to do with it. And I think one of the bigoted ideas that people have about trans people is media sometimes puts in this idea that they're lying. They're trying to trick you, you know.
Oh yeah.
They're you know, there's this whole idea of a trans person is really the gender they were born as, but they're trying to pretend to be the other gender and that kind of thing. So I think that plays a role in it and all that kind of stuff.
All of the hysteria in the background.
Yeah.
In the beginning of the show, we talked about how ignorant we are about this subject. How are we doing?
I think you guys are doing great.
Is there any time? Yeah, go ahead.
I do want to just mention in your intro when you said something about we don't know anything about transgenders. I just want to point out that transgender is an adjective, so you would want to say transgender people is the right way to say it.
Nice.
And what would be offensive about that?
Well, when you say
potentially,
potentially when you say transgenders, it makes it sound like the person that's what they are. Like it can be, some people feel it's dehumanizing because it's
there's
like
a kind of label there.
Yeah, because it's like you wouldn't say like you would say like it's like actually like anything else, like you would say like a gay person or a black person or whatever, or a tall person or a short person.
I might say the gays think that way.
Right. Right. So like, you're
gonna get hate email.
a lot of times, you know, people do, or you know, a lot of people are very sensitive to that because they don't want to just be the
objectified and then minimalized, because in some ways that's how society wants to work, and of course it's always the intention of words. So I thank you for sharing. So we have some comments coming in. I'd like to get
one
to
last question.
Yeah.
What are some of the things people who don't understand transgenders might say or do, which is very unconscious, which might be offensive?
Right. So a lot of times people will say, born a girl or born a boy, like we talked about at the beginning of the show. Yeah. I think that's a big one because it's hard to wrap your mind around this idea because of the way gender is constructed in society. And so a lot of people are like, oh, that person is born a boy, or that person was born in the wrong body is another one, because I still have the same body I had, but it's been modified by hormones. So I have facial hair that I didn't have. I have hair in other parts of my body that I didn't have.
In fact, when I came to you with the show and I said, what are the show ideas? I think the first thing I said was born in the wrong body or something. And then you said, no, Andy, that's not the show title.
Right.
And then I laughed, writing back to you immediately. No, you were actually born in the right body. It just wasn't defined by society yet.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So I think that's a big one that people say, or another one people will ask, you know, a lot of times people will ask, so have you had the surgery, you know, and like I said at the beginning, I'm very open about it, but obviously, like, you wouldn't, like we were just talking about, you wouldn't go up to a stranger and be like, what do you have between your legs? And sometimes people do ask trans people that, like, when they first meet them, they're like, oh, you're trans? Okay, so do you have a, do you have a penis or a vagina? And it's like,
but to stay with that for a moment, although it might be offensive, in some ways, I find it refreshing, because if there's just trying to understand, then I think there's an issue that I think that's sad, is that when on this show we talk about the talk aboutable, like we can discuss everything. Now it's always the issue is that when someone applies a judgment or a value judgment to it, it becomes a problem. But if it's like we're having a beautiful discussion, it's like, do you have a penis or not? Like, and in some ways, that's the most innocent, loving question that would be asked, and yet it could be offensive to another person. So that's the struggle I see.
Well, it's always contextualized, right?
It's always contextual. Yes.
It's contextualized, because, like I was saying, like if you're gonna have sex with that person, obviously. It's good to know what you're getting into, but it's also the kind of thing where it's like, especially in our culture, I feel like sexual parts are privatized. It's a private kind of thing where, like, the same, like, obviously, like the same reason, like if I go to a doctor, I'm gonna tell them I'm transgender, because the doctor needs to know, especially if I'm going to get a mammogram or something like that. They need to know this person has female anatomy, so we need to be looking for the same things we would look for in a woman, that kind of thing. But if it's just some person that I've just met, it's like, hey, nice to meet you, I'm Jack, and we're talking, and I'm like, oh, I don't know whether you know I'm transgender. And they're like, oh, so what surgeries have you had? What body parts do you have?
Yeah, okay.
Like,
I got it. I got it. Yes, totally. Yeah, I guess what I've noticed, and this is what I think is sad about all society, by the way, not just this topic. We bring on a lot of topics that deal with this, where society has certain norms, and then an outside the norm situation arises, and people don't know how to address it. And then what I see is that, like, since it's so separate, like, so in the case of transgender people, when they're in a situation, individuals don't know how to engage it. And then the transgender people also are fighting to be seen and understood and recognized. And then there's often they separate further and further. So the conservatives get even more conservative, and then the transgender people get even more diligent about saying, hey, you don't see me, you don't understand me. And I see that divide increasing.
Right. Yeah. That's what happens too. And I think that also because there's a lot of misinformation that goes around.
For sure.
Because there are conservatives who have issues around transgender people, and there are also more left-wing people who have issues around transgender people. What I've noticed the difference is when I've talked to friends who are conservative, who sometimes they will post like political things, being like, "Oh, we can't have this because blah blah blah." And I've noticed that a lot of times their fears tend to come from misinformation, where it's like, "Oh, well, you're saying that I'm not allowed to identify as my gender because everyone should be transgender," or something like that. Where it's like, no, that's not what we're saying. Where I can explain, no, I'm saying I just want to be able to express my gender too. Or there'll be misinformation around medical stuff. Like kids who are young can take what's called hormone blockers, which stops puberty from starting. It's a reversible drug. If you stop the drug, puberty will begin. But a lot of times people don't know that. So a lot of times a lot of conservatives will be like, this should not be allowed because the child is too young for something that's permanent. And then if you explain to them, oh, it's not permanent, then they're like, oh, okay. Whereas I found that a lot of times with more left-wing people, the issue is more where they're comparing what they think is the most important issue for society to address, where they'll be like, why should I care about your right to have trans children in school, the sports teams that they want, when we have issues in the United States with healthcare access, kind of thing, where it's like, okay, now you're playing the like who's more important game. Like it's all important. And I think that's the big difference I see between conservatives and liberals, at least in the United States.
Yeah. Well, I see in the US, everything is so politicized that Bambos doesn't like me talking about it anymore.
Oh, you're not going to say that again.
Oh, no? Okay.
No.
So I'm going to talk about it more. So then I've noticed that whenever I have to interact with the US, it's so polarized that things become caricatures. So we're no longer looking at things as they are. We have to look at it through a lens of a conservative or a liberal lens, which means we don't see it for what it actually is. And that's in so many areas, but gender identification is obviously one of the biggies, just because it's such a great thing to rally around. It's such a great thing to make trouble about, because it's so easy to say, hey, I don't want that transgender going in the bathroom. It's like, pick one topic that everyone can galvanize themselves around, and then all of a sudden you've got a voting block.
Right. And then there's a whole issue too, that there are people, like I said, like some of my conservative friends who have misinformation, who are like, oh, I didn't know that. And then they don't feel badly about it anymore. But there is also the issue that when you're dealing with people being bigoted all the time and people wanting to think, you can tend to get very reactionary and be like, okay, anyone who doesn't accept me right off the bat, I'm offended, go away.
Yeah.
And then there's no dialogue at all.
Yeah, and the dialogue is obviously what I always want to see, because I see that's where we understand one another better without the idea that we already know, and that's the life that I'd love that I am part of. And speaking of bringing other people in, Mr. Bolalang, he's in South Africa, and he's basically the third person on our sofa. He's always here and asking questions. There are people who are still calling him by his English name that he got rid of 27 years ago, even though I've told them that's not the name I use any longer. And that's the mind fuck that Andy's talking about.
This was in the beginning of the show.
Yeah, this is what we discussed for me.
Yeah, I can totally understand that. I've been talking with a couple of parents who have said, my child just changed their name. I'm trying to use their new name, but I forget sometimes.
Yeah. And your parents will just call you by your new name?
Yes. At this point, yes.
How many times do you see them slip up at all?
Not with the name anymore. Every once in a while, my mom will slip up and say she, and then she'll be like, well, I meant he.
Yeah, of course.
But it's kind of like a thing where it's like, I was a she and my female name for 33 years. It's hard to relearn.
Yeah. Iris, who's Israeli, she's thanks for the fascinating sharing. Did you feel a difference in how society interacted with you as a female versus male? Very interesting question.
I think that's really an important question too, and that could be a whole topic for a whole other show.
I agree totally.
But some of the things I've noticed is, like, looking back at I wasn't diagnosed with autism until adult either. And looking back, I think one of the reasons was because I was socialized and seen as female, and girls with autism, if they are quiet and they do their work, but they're having issues socially, a lot of times teachers will be like, oh, well, and I think that was part of the issue. And, and some things I have noticed, I was telling someone this story the other day, was that I went to a networking event after I had transitioned, and one of the men there was like very racist, very homophobic, and he just sat next to me, started saying these things without any shame, having no idea I was transgender. And I got the sense that he was like, oh, this guy's a dude, and being a dude means you say these horrible things, and I don't think that he would have said those things if he...
No way.
Yeah. Wow. So that was a big thing I noticed. And being self-employed, I think, is a little bit different than if I was in a job, because I think, like, most of the jobs I had that were outside the home were before I transitioned. So a lot of times it would be a kind of thing where it would be like I was always the person who was best at doing the work but didn't get the promotions and that kind of thing. And I'm pretty sure that was a gender issue as well. Now I'm more or less self-employed for the most part. And when I was getting my social work degree was after I transitioned, and I did have some internships, but it's a little hard to tell because I was out as transgender. So, like, the big issues that I would see would be like boss being like, hey, would you be willing to do a presentation for the other people so that they know how to interact with transgender clients better? Yeah. So that kind of is a different thing. Like, if they didn't know I was transgender, I don't know how.
You said in that last paragraph, you said when it was after I transitioned.
Right.
And my question to you is, what would be the point where you defined it as the transition? Because you could say that there was a transitioning going on. So what's the moment in life you said, okay, that's when I transitioned? What when was that?
I would say once I started hormones, got my name changed.
Okay.
So that I was presenting as male and the legal documents match up, which, by the way, is another reason that I'm glad to be self-employed, because Social Security does not change your gender unless you've had surgery. So even though I have a male name on my Social Security card, every time I apply for a job, when they do the background check and they run your Social Security number, it'll flag it as this person is female and maybe it's fraudulent, and I always have to explain. And so that is
other countries or places in the world, or even in the US, like states where this is not happening?
Well, the Social Security Administration is federal, but state laws in the U.S. are different from state to state. Like here in New York, in order to change my name on my birth certificate and my gender on my birth certificate, I just had to send them the paperwork showing I changed my name and a letter from my doctor saying this person is transgender. That's it. But in other states, you have to have the surgeries, or you have to have a letter from a therapist, not just any doctor. Or some states, you have to have a letter from a therapist to start hormones and another letter from 2 therapists to get surgery. And other states, you just have to go and be like, I feel I'm transgender. And you have an intake where they talk to you about it. They're like, the doctor's like, okay, this sounds like this person, it's appropriate for this person to get on hormones.
Yeah.
So their state laws all vary. I don't know about laws in other countries because I haven't really researched them. You might know more about what it's like in Denmark than I would.
I have, but we have.
Yeah, dead naming is what a lot of trans people call it, because they feel that name is dead. That's not who I am. For me, I just basically I don't really share my name my old name, unless somebody really wants to know. Obviously, my sister's kids know, because my sister we have old photos and old family videos where they call me by that name, and when they were really little, they'd be like, "Who's that?" And my sister would be like, "Oh, that's Jack." So so obviously they know. They're 10 now, and so they don't. And so that's not a big deal, but I don't really share it with strangers. I don't feel that connection with it, because my old name was a very common female name. So I meet a lot of people with that name, and I never go, "Oh, that used to be me," or anything like that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. There were a few more. Bolalong made a joke to something earlier, so we won't put that on. I don't understand this one that he said right here. I work with a gentleman that none of us has ever seen at the urinals, and it is amazing how gentlemen wanted to know whether he has a penis or not, but no one was prepared to ask.
Oh, this was when people were asking about penis.
Oh, okay, yeah, interesting. But this is the situations that emerge when you live in a society where everyone's messing in everyone's business.
Yeah, I can definitely see that, because there are some times where I choose not to use the public restrooms, and sometimes because if I have to go into a men's room, like at the train station, and sometimes there's a long line, and the urinals are always free, but there's a long line for the stalls, and sometimes I'll be like, I don't want anyone to be wondering why I don't just use a urinal, or or someone going to know because I go to a stall, or they're gonna figure out what I have down there or have a problem.
Yeah, is that uncomfortable for you still today? Like being in New York and having to go to a public restroom? Is that like a moment you're like, oh no, what am I gonna do?
Sometimes it depends on where it is. Like in a restaurant, I'm usually okay. Like when I used to go to restaurants before COVID. Now it's not an issue because I'm at home all the time. But
I can imagine the nightclubs are more where everyone's drinking and there's a long line.
Yeah, nightclubs, and also places like I take the train into I would take the train to New York City too.
Mm-hmm.
And at Penn Station, which is a big train station where you come into New York, they have a men's room and they have a women's room, and so sometimes, like after a long trip, I would be like, I want to use the men's room, but if there's too much of a line or too many people waiting, I might be like, forget it, because it's also awkward to use a men's room for me too, because the way they're set up with the urinals, and sometimes there are men who go into the stalls but leave the door open so you can see them peeing, and so I'm like, I really don't want to see that.
But I mean, we've had a lot of discussions because in the Netherlands, we have outdoor urinals. And my wife and I have had real not arguments. She's been arguing that how come society makes public urinals available to all these males, but there's nothing available for us females, right?
Because men just pee everywhere.
Yeah, exactly. So we have to say they're going to pee anywhere. So let's at least have them pee at one designated location. But the thing that we were laughing at, she says, but there are these things that I can get where I can basically just have like a stream, like a funnel, and then pee like a man. So in some ways,
I know there are some trans people who use things like that.
Yeah,
there are some trans people who get a device so that they can pee like a man, and there are also some trans people who will get like not a strap on that's like a sexual thing, but something similar, like a prosthetic kind of thing that they can wear down there so that they can feel that bulge, and they like that. For me, it's not something I've ever really cared about, so.
Yeah,
I haven't felt that need to do that. But I will say it is awkward going into a men's room too, because sometimes it's like you don't always know if the stalls are empty, and sometimes someone will leave, and I'm like, I don't want to walk in on someone, or sometimes I'll be about to go to the stall and someone else, because the line will be like, they have two lines going this way to go to the same stalls. So like you're about to go to the stall, someone from the other side just like swoops in, and it's like, and for me, I think that's probably more awkward for me as a trans person, because it's also the whole thing of like not being raised now. Like, I don't know, like, what is the etiquette? Like, what are you supposed to do if two people are fighting over the stall? That kind of thing.
Yeah. And I mean, a lot of the stalls don't have partitions on them either. So, I mean, it's not like you have any privacy.
Right. Well, we do have a fair number of stalls that have doors in our restrooms, but and I will sometimes use a handicapped stall because it always has the door, and it's big, and and so I would say, it's less awkward than it is, but there are still times where, and I think that's also goes back to conditioning also, because like for so many years I was not living my gender, so I was like, and especially before I started the hormones, when I was having periods, it would be like going into a men's room when that's going on just is not feel right, when going to the women's room didn't feel right, and that would be very awkward.
Yeah. You know what I think is interesting is that we are now interacting with you as a male. So for us, we see you as Jack, right?
Right.
We talk about your history, but it's interesting because we don't have to deal with all of the ideas that this is who Jack was before.
Right.
So now we have to deal with the confusion. So in some strange way, all your friends from this moment forward kind of are you're meeting with the Jack as you are now identified, which means life is a lot easier. And it's just, I just find it, and not only for you, by the way, one thing we discussed often on this show is that when somebody does a drastic shift in their lives, where they've fundamentally shifted who they are inside, but people don't recognize it, they always treat them as the old person, even though they're a very different person.
Right, which is actually a very good segue, because that's actually what my novel is about.
Please bring it out. Let's see it, and let's talk about it for a moment.
Yes, this is my proof copy. Your copy will not say not for resale on it. But this is Reinventing Hannah, which is available in paperback as well as hardback and ebook, and I will have an audio coming out. But anyway, it's about a 16-year-old girl. Her name's Hannah, obviously, and she has been holding back who she really is because her mom is bipolar, so she doesn't want to be like her mom. So she tries to be like the ultimate good girl, until one day she goes with her friend to a party, and unfortunately, even though she's the one who doesn't drink, somebody drugs her drink, and she wakes up the next morning with no memory of the sexual assault that she just experienced. And her journey is a transformation journey where she goes from being this girl who is so quiet that her friends call her Mouse, to being somebody who stands up for herself and other survivors, and starts being an advocate for things to change. And so throughout her journey, one of the issues is that her friends don't like this. her friends are like, this is not who you really are, because they think that the way she was before is who she really is. And so her best friend is kind of like, I don't think this is healthy. And is always trying to push her the other direction. It creates this rift between them because, first of all, in addition to the fact that she doesn't tell her friend right away what happened. And so her friend is like offended by that. And then when she does tell her friend is trying to stand up for her, but accidentally mentions it in front of a lot of people. So now everyone knows, which makes life harder for her. And so there's this big rift that's developing. But the big thing is her personality is different. Now she's more likely to stand up for what she really thinks. She's more likely to say what she really feels. She starts dating the guy that she wants to date that her friends thought was no good. And she starts being like this different person where for her old friends, they're just like, what's going on? Whereas and she makes some new friends as a result of what she's been glad. And for them, they're just like, this is really cool. And they're pushing her to speak in front of the whole school. And she doesn't know she wants to do that. So it's really about her transformational journey throughout this experience.
Beautiful.
Can I see how thick that is?
Yeah, it is. Depending on the edition, this one is 300 something pages. I think the paperback edition ended up being 400 something. Because it's smaller. It's a pretty thick book, and one of the reasons I independently published is because young adult novels are supposed to not be more than 90,000 words, and this is 100,000. So.
Yeah, I was gonna say I've been learning all the worlds. You said 90,000, I'd say 75,000. That's probably closer to what they really want to.
I think because they say like 70 to 90.
Yeah,
but I think it's implied 90 is not what we really want. But
well, I can tell you for our show, everyone would say our show should be about 30 minutes, and it's turned into an hour every day at least, because that's the time we need to get to the point. Yeah. The book, how much from that book do you feel like is you channeling your life through Hannah, and how much of it is like just things that come up as through your creative writing?
Yeah, definitely. That's a great question. I like to say that Hannah is who I would have been if I wasn't transgender. Because at the beginning, I mean, I don't have a bipolar parent, but at the beginning, she's very shy, like I was very shy in high school. And I didn't pursue the opportunities I want to pursue. And actually, her love interest, Brad, is partially based on a guy that was a class clown when I was in high school that I liked, that I knew my family would be like, oh, you know. So, and so it's partially based on that. And it's also, I made up friends for her that I didn't have, and she does some things that I wouldn't have done. And obviously, like, her family situation is different. Her friends are different. But the interesting thing that I didn't realize till afterwards is that she has two friends, one of which is her friend Sierra is a Black girl who is a little bit more free-spirited, and her friend Molly is a redhead who's a little bit overweight. And the physical descriptions look just like my sister's two best friends in high school.
But no coincidence.
Right. Right. So I was not even thinking that when I was writing it.
Yeah.
I didn't really realize that. So my sister's still in touch with one of them today, and so she came over once, and she still looks kind of the same.
Oh,
and when I saw her, I was like thinking, oh, that's where Molly came from.
A deep subconscious moment channeling.
So there's definitely those similarities.
I know we're over the hour, but did you, like, from the point of view of where you are today, did you go back into your past and connect with childhood people just because there were things that were not resolved for you, or just to find peace, or are you completely disconnected from that past life?
I'm pretty much disconnected from that. I mean, I do obviously have a relationship with my family, so that's continued. I'm not really in touch very much with anyone from high school. I do have a couple of people that I knew in high school who followed me to my new Facebook profile when I because when I changed my name, I just started a new profile because I was just like, anyone who wants to join me
in the new life,
the new life, just come here. And so I do have a couple of people from high school who are on there who I talk to every once in a while. I think there was one lady that I knew online who, when I came out, was like, I've known you all these years, and when you were in high school, I never had any reason not to think you were a woman, and she didn't follow me, and that was fine, because I was just like, she does not need to if that's the way she feels. And then there were a couple of people from high school that I didn't make any effort to follow, because I was like, I was never really that friendly with them, and if they're not that interested in me, I don't need them anymore. So, and I can't, I'm trying to think if there's anyone that I knew from childhood on my Facebook profile. I don't think so, because most of my friends from childhood, I kind of outgrew by high school. So,
Wonderful.
And I have one last super question.
Sure.
When parents call you to say, hey, my child came out, I don't know if that's what you would call it, or my child said they're transgender or whatever. They, like, when they say, what do we do? My mind was saying, love them.
Right.
But what would be the thing that you would first give to these parents?
Right. So the first thing I do is I always start with a supportive statement. I always start by saying, I want to thank you for wanting to support your child, because as we know, there are so many parents who unfortunately are not able to even take this step. And there are so many parents who would kick their child out of the house, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I want you to know that I think that it's great that you want to support your child, and I'm glad you're reaching out. And that's where I start, because I want them to be reassured that they're doing the right thing. And then I try to talk about, so let's talk about what's specifically going on for you and your child, what the concerns are, and really try to do the active listening and try to get at what they're feeling. And then I like to try to start small and give them a small action step to take. Like, I remember the first one I talked to back when I was on the Trevor Project line was a woman who called in, and she said, my son just told me he's a girl and he's in the basement getting drunk right now. And so as we were talking, she kept saying she about, or he, whichever it was. I think it was a son transitioning to female. So I think she was saying the wrong pronoun. And so after I had spoken with her, well, the first thing I did was I tried to use the child's name instead of using any pronoun when I was reflecting what she was saying, to try to get her off that track. And then at some point I said, I noticed you've been saying he. What would you think about saying she when you are with your child? And she said, I can do it as long as my husband isn't home, or something like that. But even that, I felt like was a big step for her. And I felt like that was something actionable that she could do to get started that would help support her child right away, to make that effort. So I try to look for, like, what can we do to get started?
Little steps that continue to progress in a direction. I'd love to share a story with you, by the way, with just because I always like to leave on a humorous note. I'm visiting my aunt whose son has come out as gay, but it hasn't been announced to the family yet. I'm at the house and she says to me, Andy, before he gets home, I just want you to know that our son is gay. And then for me, it was such a normal thing, like to even make it theatrics of any sort was already absurd. And so I played this. I opened myself. Are you serious? No, he's not. Are you kidding me? and then I said, when is he coming home? Because I need to leave before he gets here.
Oh my gosh.
And I could see her face didn't know how to process that, it's like her worst fear was coming to life right now.
Oh my gosh. They're actually running in the opposite direction of what happened after I had come out. My mom's aunt, too, she's not alive anymore, unfortunately, but she was at the time, who my mom was close to. And my mom was a little nervous about her knowing, because she was in her late 70s, early 80s. So she's like, I just don't know how she's going to react. So I was like, I'll just tell her. So I sent her an email or a letter or whatever it was, and I just then basically I just wanted to let you know I'm going by Jack now. I consider myself male, blah, blah, blah. And so then my mom talked to her on the phone and she asked her aunt, her aunt brought it up, and my mom was like, oh, I didn't know how to tell you. Her aunt said, I live in the 21st century. You don't have to worry.
Exactly. That was sort of my reaction. Wow. Well, we've gone well over our hour, Jack. So thank you very much for being with us. It was a pleasure to spend time with you.
Yeah, same here. I really enjoyed this experience and really enjoyed talking with you. It was great.
Thank you. And then for people who might want to find and check out the book, how would they do that?
So you can go on Amazon. It's exclusive to Amazon right now. So you would search for Reinventing Hannah or search for my name, Jack Ori, on Amazon. And
can you send it? Can you send it to us in a chat, and we'll
make sure it gets posted. Great.
Let me do that. Oops.
So then we send you a hug and we thank you, and we're just grateful that we got to have this time with you. Yeah.
Yes, definitely. And people can also get me on Facebook or Instagram or Twitter. I have two, author Jack Ori or Coach Jack Ori. I can send you those links as well.
So people who also are both parents and the children either way can come to you. Is that right? Or you're focusing on either group?
I'm focusing mostly on parents, but I do work with children as well, and also if they want to do like a family thing. So here's my Amazon. I'm sending you my Amazon link in the chat right now. Perfect. And I'm going to send you my handles. Facebook, Twitter. So just
you're a fast typer.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's a creative writing.
Yeah. And I used to do temp work as like secretarial work. So I'm pretty used to other kids mention that too. Whenever they were watching me type, they're like, what? Can you type really fast? They like to do like the racing thing. How fast can you type this?
I love it.
All right.
Thank you again, Jack.
Much love. Thank you.
All the best.
All right. You too.
Bye.
Bye.
That was fun.
A great way to spend a Tuesday late afternoon.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. That was really a fun ride. It's so funny. There's so many more questions I get on some of these shows. Like, I think an hour and a half won't be enough for everything that I'm interested in.
We could have also asked Jack to join us on our most embarrassing moments show.
Yeah, I didn't get to that question, but I was like, there must have been horrific like moments, that just embarrassing, horrible mishaps.
Yeah,
we didn't get into many of those. I had that as my big question, but there were too many serious questions we had to ask before then. Yeah. So I mean, I think I always like to look at bigger themes on these shows, and the theme that I saw that was resonating with me a lot was how we as a society have these norms, and how hard it is for society to allow a different thing that doesn't exist in the current norm. And I believe that it takes sometimes generations for society to like move past its preconceptions of what things are, like gender, for instance. Yeah. So I see that the people of today are really educating the people of tomorrow. And there'll be it's like the bell curve. There'll be the early adopters, the late adopters, the mid, and then there'll be the ones that are on the back end where the whole train has passed them by. But yeah, I do believe that it's as society evolves and we allow ourselves to look through our own biases, that this is just another thing we're going to learn and grow from. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And we're going to see you guys tomorrow. Yes, and so much more.
Stop the so much more thing. It's killing me. I can't. Now I regret that I've ever said that. So we'll see you tomorrow
and so much
more.
On a wonderful chaos.